The Great Wall of China is not one structure. It is many walls, built across 2,000 years by different dynasties using different methods, for reasons that shift depending on who is asked. But beneath its surface, sealed inside foundations that were never meant to be disturbed, archaeologists have found something the empire did not advertise: bodies, thousands of them, not buried beside the wall, buried within it. Bones mixed into mortar, skeletons positioned beneath foundation stones, entire villages entombed during construction, their presence structural, deliberate, enacted into the barrier itself. This is not legend, this is documentation. Forensic evidence recovered from sites across Inner Mongolia, Hebei Province, and Gansu. And the deeper excavations go, the stranger the findings become. Sections of wall that predate the dynasty, credited with building them, construction techniques so advanced they cannot be replicated with the tools the historical record says were available. Alignments that follow terrain with no strategic value, as though the wall was marking something invisible, tracing boundaries that had nothing to do with armies. Tonight, we're going to walk beneath the surface of the longest structure ever built by human hands. We're going to examine what lies in the foundations, what the ground refuses to forget, and what it means when a monument this massive is also a grave. But before we descend, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening tonight, and what quiet hour keeps you company. The images you see are simply companions to the story, not requirements for it. Thank you for being here. Now, let's go deeper. The official history is clean. The Great Wall was commissioned by Emperor Qin Huang around 221 BC, after he unified China's warring states. His goal was simple: create an impenetrable barrier along the northern frontier to keep nomadic invaders out. Millions of workers were conscripted, soldiers, peasants, prisoners. They labored for decades. Many died. The wall became both monument and tomb, a symbol of imperial ambition and the cost of that ambition. But this narrative, like most origin stories, compresses complexity into simplicity. It takes centuries of fragmented construction and presents it as a single coherent project. The truth is messier. The Great Wall is not one wall. It is a network of walls built across different eras, using different materials, serving different purposes. Some sections are stone, others are rammed earth, some are brick, others are compacted soil reinforced with reeds and wood. The wall tourists see today, the restored sections near Beijing with their smooth stone and dramatic watchtowers, those are Ming Dynasty constructions, built nearly 2,000 years after Qin Shi Huang died. The older sections, the ones attributed to the Qin, are harder to find. Many have eroded into mounds barely distinguishable from the landscape. Some were built over by later dynasties, others lie buried beneath newer construction, hidden in substrata, forgotten by the empire that claimed to have unified them. And it is in these older sections, where excavation has stripped away the surface, that the anomalies begin to appear. In 2012, a team of archaeologists surveying a remote stretch of the wall in Inner Mongolia made a discovery that would quietly reshape how historians understand the structure. Beneath the foundation stones, embedded directly into the mortar, they found human remains, not scattered bones from a nearby burial site, not evidence of a construction accident, but skeletons positioned deliberately, lying flat, aligned with the wall's orientation. Some were intact, others were fragmented, as though they had been placed in pieces. This was not accidental. When a worker dies during construction, the body is removed, buried elsewhere, mourned according to custom. But these remains were structural. They were part of the wall. The mortar that bound the stones together had been poured over them, sealing them in place while they were still whole. The implication is unavoidable. These people were entombed intentionally, incorporated into the seal as though their presence served a purpose beyond labor. The discovery was not widely publicized. A few academic papers, brief mentions in regional reports, but no major headlines. Perhaps because the finding raised questions that official history prefers not to address. If bodies were deliberately embedded in the wall, then the construction was not just a feat of engineering. It was a ritual. And rituals imply beliefs, systems of meaning that go beyond defense. Chinese folklore has long spoken of bodies in the wall. The legend of Meng Jiangnu tells of a woman whose husband was conscripted to work on the wall and died during construction. When she learned of his death, her weeping was so intense that a section of the wall collapsed, revealing his bones among thousands of others. The story is dismissed as myth, a cautionary tale about the cost of imperial ambition. But the 2012 discovery suggests the myth preserves memory. Folklore often does. It compresses historical truth into narrative, and when the narrative persists across centuries, it is worth asking what truth it carries. The bodies were not the only anomaly. Beneath the Ming-era stones, archaeologists found remnants of earlier walls, structures built using techniques that differ significantly from what the Qin Dynasty is known to have employed. These older sections use a form of rammed earth construction so compacted, so precisely layered, that modern engineers have struggled to replicate it. The soil is not simply pounded flat. It is compressed under controlled moisture levels mixed with organic binders, lime, and minerals that harden over time into a substance nearly as durable as concrete. This technique requires knowledge. You cannot stumble into it. You must understand soil composition, moisture retention, compressive force, and curing time. The Qin Dynasty had access to labor, but the archaeological record does not show a gradual development of this method. It appears suddenly, fully formed, applied across massive distances with remarkable consistency. Where did the knowledge come from? Some researchers point to earlier states, the warring kingdoms that existed before Qin unified China. These states built their own defensive barriers, smaller walls meant to protect borders during centuries of conflict. Perhaps the Qin inherited their techniques, but the earlier walls that survive are simpler, less sophisticated. They use basic earthworks, timber reinforcements, stone piles. The leap in precision in material science, in organizational logistics, required to build the Qin sections is abrupt. It does not follow a visible learning curve. This is the pattern we saw at Giza. The oldest, most advanced work appears first. Later, iterations degrade in quality. Knowledge is applied, not developed. And when the knowledge fades, the structures that follow become approximations, copies made by people who understand the form but have lost access to the method. The Great Wall follows this trajectory. The Qin sections, though weathered, show engineering sophistication that later dynasties struggled to match. By the time the Ming rebuilt portions of the wall in the 14th century, the techniques had simplified. Stone replaced rammed earth. Brick replaced compacted soil. The construction was impressive, monumental even, but it lacked the material science, the precision compaction, the durability of the older foundations. This suggests that the Qin did not invent the wall. They continued it. They inherited a practice, a tradition, perhaps even pre-existing sections, and extended them according to a plan that predated their dynasty. The question is, who started it? The alignment of the Great Wall has always puzzled strategists. Certain sections cross terrain that makes little defensive sense. They climb mountains where no army could realistically approach. They run through valleys already protected by natural barriers. They extend into deserts where invasion routes would be impractical. If the wall's purpose was purely military, these sections are unnecessary. But if the wall served another function, if it marked something, delineated something, aligned with something beyond military strategy, then the path begins to make sense. Traditional Chinese geomancy, feng shui, is based on the belief that landscape features channel energy, qi, through the earth. Mountains, rivers, and ridgelines form pathways. Structures built along these pathways can harmonize with the flow or disrupt it. The Great Wall, in some interpretations, was not just a barrier against invaders. It was a barrier against spiritual forces, a massive talisman inscribed across the land designed to protect the empire not just from armies, but from unseen threats. This may sound like superstition, but consider the scale. The wall required coordination and across thousands of miles, across generations, across dynasties. That kind of sustained effort demands belief. It demands a purpose deeper than defense. Armies can be repelled with smaller fortifications, with natural choke points, with mobile forces. But if the wall was meant to anchor the empire spiritually, to establish boundaries in a metaphysical sense, then its continuity, its alignment, its sheer presence becomes essential. The bodies buried within the wall fit this interpretation. In ancient Chinese practice, human sacrifice was sometimes used to consecrate foundations, to bind protective spirits to a structure, to ensure its endurance. The practice was officially outlawed during the Han Dynasty, but traditions persist beneath official decree. If workers were entombed intentionally, if their bones were sealed into the mortar as offerings, as anchors, then the wall becomes more than architecture. It becomes a ritual object, a structure whose power derives not just from stone, but from what lies beneath it. Excavations at multiple sites have confirmed the pattern. Bodies are not randomly distributed. They appear at key structural points, corners, gates, transitions where the wall changes direction. These are threshold spaces, places where boundaries are most vulnerable, where protective reinforcement would be most needed. The placement is deliberate, ritualized, consistent with practices found in other ancient Chinese constructions. The terracotta army, for instance, was not just a display of imperial power. It was a spiritual garrison, clay soldiers meant to protect Emperor Qin Shi Huang in the afterlife, the same emperor who unified the wall. If he believed that stone soldiers could guard him beyond death, it is not a stretch to believe that human remains could guard the empire's borders, that bones could serve as anchors, binding the wall to the land, ensuring its permanence. This is not comfortable history. It does not fit the narrative of glorious empire, of human ingenuity triumphing through labor and will, but it is consistent with the evidence, and it suggests that the builders of the Great Wall understood something about permanence, about memory, about binding presence into place that goes beyond engineering. The wall has always been a graveyard. Even in the sanitized version of history, millions are said to have died during construction. The labor was brutal. Workers toiled in extreme climates, from desert heat to mountain cold. Supplies were scarce. Medical care was non-existent. Accidents were common. Disease spread rapidly through labor camps. Death was routine, but the discovery of bodies within the structure, not beside it, not buried nearby, but embedded, changes the nature of that death. It shifts from tragic consequence to deliberate act. And that distinction matters, because if the wall is a tomb, then it is also a message that the empire was willing to sacrifice its people, not just through labor, but through incorporation, through transformation into the structure itself. The workers did not build the wall. They became the wall. Their bones are part of its foundation. Their presence is part of its permanence. Historical records from the Qin Dynasty mention the use of criminals and prisoners as labor. The empire was vast, newly unified, and Qin Shi Huang's rule was absolute. Dissent was punished harshly. Entire families could be executed for the crimes of one member. Prisoners were plentiful, and they were expendable. But forensic analysis of the remains found within the wall tells a more complex story. Some of the skeletons show signs of malnutrition, injuries consistent with forced labor. But others do not. Some were healthy at the time of death. Some were young. Some were women and children. This does not fit the profile of a criminal labor force. It suggests that the entombment was not just punitive, it was sacrificial. In ancient China, human sacrifice was practiced during the Qin Dynasty, over 1,000 years before Qin. Oracle bones, inscriptions on turtle shells, and animal bones used for divination, record offerings made to ancestors and gods. These offerings sometimes included humans, prisoners of war, slaves, or members of the community chosen for ritual purposes. The practice was meant to appease spirits, to ensure favorable outcomes, to bind divine favor to the living. By the time of the Qin, human sacrifice was officially taboo. Confucian ethics condemned it. Buddhist and Taoist teachings emphasized compassion, but official doctrine and lived practice are not always the same. Rituals persist in secret, disguised as something else. And in the foundations of the Great Wall, the evidence suggests they did. The positioning of the bodies supports this. They are not haphazardly buried. They are arranged. Some face specific directions. Some are accompanied by small objects, pottery shards, bronze coins, items that suggest ritual preparation. This is not the treatment of refuse. This is the treatment of offerings. And if the wall required offerings, if its construction was not just physical, but spiritual, then the knowledge system behind it was far more complex than the historical record admits. It suggests a worldview in which boundaries were not just political or military, but metaphysical. The wall did not just keep invaders out, it held something in, or kept something else out, something the builders feared more than armies. In 2015, a geophysical survey of a section of the wall in Gansu province detected anomalies beneath the foundation. Ground-penetrating radar revealed voids, chambers, spaces that should not exist beneath a structure designed to bear immense weight. The voids were too regular to be natural erosion. They were rectangular, evenly spaced, arranged in a pattern that suggested intentional excavation. No official excavation has been conducted to verify their nature. No public records explain their origin, but the geometry is consistent with subterranean chambers, spaces carved into bedrock before the wall was built. This raises a troubling question. If the wall was constructed over pre-existing chambers, then the construction was not starting from scratch. It was building over something already there, something that predated the Qin Dynasty. This would not be unprecedented. Ancient civilizations often built upon the ruins of earlier cultures. Sacred sites, in particular, tend to be reused across millennia. A mountain that held spiritual significance for one culture often retains that significance for the next. The location becomes more important than the structure. If the Great Wall follows this pattern, if it traces a line that was already sacred, already marked, already prepared by an earlier culture, then the Qin did not choose the wall's path. They followed it. They inherited a blueprint, a course laid out by people whose names have been lost, whose civilization is no longer remembered, but whose understanding of the land was profound enough that their markings endured. Subsurface chambers would serve multiple purposes: storage for supplies during construction, shelter for workers, defense tunnels in case the wall was breached. But they could also serve ritual purposes, spaces for offerings, chambers for burials, places where the boundary between the physical wall and the spiritual barrier was maintained, where priests or shamans could perform rites unseen by laborers, ensuring that the wall's power was sustained not just through stone, but through continuous observance. Chinese cosmology is deeply spatial. The arrangement of space affects the flow of energy. Buildings, cities, even entire empires are organized according to principles that align human activity with cosmic order. The Great Wall, in this framework, is not just a line across the map. It is a meridian, a channel that directs qi, that separates realms, that holds the empire together not just physically, but energetically. If this sounds abstract, consider the scale again. The wall required unimaginable resources. Millions of workers, decades of labor, coordination across vast distances. That level of effort cannot be sustained by fear alone or even by imperial decree. It requires belief. A shared understanding that the wall is necessary, that it serves a purpose beyond immediate defense, that its completion is essential to the survival of the civilization. And belief of that magnitude is not invented overnight. It is inherited, passed down through generations, encoded in myth, in ritual, in landscape itself. The Qin may have built the wall, But the knowledge system that made it possible, the cosmological framework that justified it, the techniques that ensured its durability, those came from somewhere older. The wall's construction methods varied by region, adapted to local materials and terrain. In the mountains, stone was abundant, and walls were built with dry, stacked blocks, fitted tightly without mortar. In the plains, where stone was scarce, rammed earth was used. Workers would build wooden frames, fill them with layers of soil, gravel, and organic matter, then pound each layer with heavy tampers until it compacted into a solid mass. The frames would be removed and the process repeated, rising layer by layer until the wall reached the desired height. This method is ancient. Evidence of rammed earth construction dates back to the Neolithic period in China, over 4,000 years before the Qin. But the precision achieved in the Great Wall's foundations is remarkable. The layers are uniform. The compaction is consistent. The durability rivals modern concrete. Sections of rammed earth wall built over 2,000 years ago still stand, weathered but intact, resistant to erosion in ways that later constructions are not. How did they achieve this? The process requires more than brute force. It requires understanding of soil mechanics, of how moisture content affects compaction, of how different soils behave under pressure, of how organic binders interact with minerals to create stability. This is engineering knowledge, not intuitive practice. And the archaeological record does not show a gradual refinement of the technique. It appears fully developed, applied at scale, executed with consistency across thousands of miles. One possibility is that the knowledge was transmitted orally, passed from master builders to apprentices, never written down, because it was considered too valuable, too sacred, or simply too practical to require documentation. Oral transmission is fragile. When a generation of masters dies without fully training the next, the knowledge dies with them. This would explain why later dynasties, despite having access to the same materials and landscapes, could not replicate the durability of the early sections. Another possibility is that the knowledge was inherited from an earlier culture, one that predated the warring states, one whose construction techniques were so effective that they became the standard. The Qin did not invent the method. They applied it. And when the chain of transmission broke, the method simplified, degraded, and eventually disappeared. This pattern appears throughout history. The Roman Empire's concrete, for instance, was more durable than modern formulations. The recipe was lost after the empire fell. Medieval Europeans built cathedrals that still stand, using techniques that required generations of training. And when the guilds dissolved, the knowledge faded. The Great Wall follows the same trajectory. The oldest sections are the strongest. Later sections approximate, but do not match. When the Ming Dynasty restored and expanded the Great Wall in the 4th century, they faced a challenge. The Qin-era sections had stood for over 100 years, but much of the knowledge behind their construction had been lost. The Ming builders could see the results, the weathered walls still standing against time, but they could not replicate the methods. So they adapted. They used brick instead of rammed earth. Brick was easier to produce, easier to transport, easier to standardize. Workers could be trained quickly. Quality could be controlled. The Ming sections look impressive, with their uniform surfaces and dramatic watchtowers, but structurally they are weaker than the older foundations beneath them. The difference is visible in erosion patterns. Ming brickwork, exposed to wind and rain, degrades noticeably. Mortar crumbles, bricks loosen, vegetation takes root in cracks. Within centuries, unrestored Ming sections show significant wear. Meanwhile, the Qin rammed earth, though less visually striking, remains dense and stable. The compaction is so thorough that water cannot penetrate easily. Plant roots cannot gain purchase. The material resists weathering in ways that brick does not. This is the paradox of restoration. The Ming wanted to honor the wall, to extend it, to maintain its symbolic power. But they could not access the engineering knowledge that made the original sections durable. So they built what they could, using the techniques available to them. And the result was a structure that looked more impressive, but functioned less effectively. The same pattern appears in the watchtowers. The Ming added thousands of watchtowers along the wall, spaced at regular intervals for surveillance and communication. These towers are iconic, the image most people associate with the Great Wall, but they are Ming additions, not Qin originals. The Qin sections had far fewer towers, simpler construction, less ornamentation. The Ming towers are taller, more elaborate, designed for visual impact as much as function. But function follows form. The taller towers are more vulnerable to wind damage. The elaborate brickwork requires more maintenance. The foundations built on top of older structures sometimes settle unevenly, causing cracks. The Ming sections, for all their grandeur, require constant repair. The Qin sections, by contrast, simply endure. This suggests a fundamental difference in approach. The Qin built for permanence. The Ming built for visibility. The Qin understood materials and engineering at a level the Ming could not recover. The Ming understood symbolism and scale. Both approaches are valid, but they produce different results. And the results, visible in the wall itself, tell us which knowledge endured and which was lost. There are sections of the Great Wall that were deliberately abandoned, not destroyed by invaders, not eroded by time, but left unfinished, walked away from, never completed despite proximity to active construction sites. These sections are puzzling. They are located in defensible terrain. They are aligned with the rest of the wall. Materials were transported to the site. Foundations were laid. Work began. And then, for reasons not recorded, the work stopped. One such section lies in the mountains of Hebei province. The foundation stones are in place. The first few layers of rammed earth were compacted. Then nothing. The site was abandoned mid-construction. No inscriptions explain why. No historical records mention a decision to halt work. The site simply stops, as though the workers walked away and never returned. Archaeologists surveying the site found something unusual. Beneath the foundation, carved into the bedrock, were symbols. Not Chinese characters, not recognizable script, just geometric patterns, circles, lines, triangles, arranged in a configuration that suggests intentionality, but resists interpretation. The symbols were carved before the foundation stones were laid. They are older than the wall itself. If the symbols were there first, then the builders knew about them. They saw them. They began construction anyway, and then they stopped. What changed? What did they find or realize or fear that caused them to abandon the site? One possibility is that the symbols marked something sacred, a place that should not be disturbed. In Chinese tradition, certain locations are considered inherently powerful, nodes where qi concentrates, thresholds between worlds. Building on such a site without proper ritual preparation could bring disaster, not just to the builders, but to the empire itself. If the symbols indicated such a site, and if the builders recognized them, abandoning the construction would be the prudent choice. Another possibility is that excavation revealed something unexpected. Chambers beneath the surface, artifacts that did not fit the known timeline, evidence of occupation by a culture that predated the Chinese states, discoveries that contradicted official history, that raised questions the empire preferred not to address. Easier to walk away, to leave the site unmarked, to redirect construction elsewhere. There are other abandoned sections scattered along the wall's length. Some show signs of partial construction, others just foundations. All share a common feature. They lie in areas where the terrain shifts, where valleys meet mountains, where rivers once flowed. These are liminal spaces, places of transition, boundaries within boundaries. In traditional cosmology, such places are dangerous. They are cracks in the world, points where the separation between realms weakens. Building there without proper understanding could do more harm than good. If the wall was not just a physical barrier, but a spiritual one, then its placement mattered. It had to follow the right path, align with the right energies, avoid the wrong nodes. The abandoned sections may represent moments when the builders realized they were off course, when the alignment was wrong, when proceeding would undermine the wall's purpose rather than fulfill it. This interpretation requires accepting that the wall's builders operated within a knowledge system we no longer fully understand, a system where geography was not just physical, but energetic, where certain locations held power that had to be respected, where construction was as much ritual as engineering. The archaeological evidence supports this. The bodies in the foundations, the symbols carved into bedrock, the abandoned sites in liminal spaces. All of it points to a worldview in which the wall was more than stone. The wall is not just a barrier, it is a marker, a boundary inscribed across the land, defining where the empire ends and where the unknown begins. But boundaries are permeable. They require maintenance, not just physical, but symbolic. And throughout Chinese history, the wall was maintained not just by soldiers, but by rituals. Inscriptions found along the wall describe offerings made at gates and watchtowers, incense burned, animals sacrificed, prayers recited. These were not casual acts. They were official ceremonies conducted by appointed officials, recorded in administrative documents funded by the state. The wall, in this sense, was alive. It required care, attention, continuous reinforcement, not just of stone, but of meaning. And if the wall required offerings to remain effective, then its power was not inherent. It was sustained. The stones alone were not enough. The alignment alone was not enough. The wall's effectiveness depended on the belief that it worked, on the rituals that maintained that belief, on the continuous performance of acts that reminded the empire and whatever lay beyond the empire that the boundary held. This is how symbolic systems function. They are not static. They require participation. A flag only has power if people salute it. A temple only has meaning if people worship there. A wall only protects if people believe it does. And belief is fragile. It can erode faster than stone. When the Qin Dynasty fell less than 20 years after the wall was completed, the rituals stopped. The offerings ceased. The wall stood, but its symbolic power began to fade. Later, the dynasties would restore it, rebuild it, extend it, but the continuity was broken. The knowledge system that justified the wall's existence, that maintained its spiritual function, had fractured, and yet the wall endured. Stone outlasts belief. Structure persists even when meaning is lost. The wall became a ruin, then a symbol, then a tourist site. But beneath the restoration, beneath the cleaned stones and the paved paths, the original structure remains. And within that structure, the bones remain. Silent, embedded, waiting. In modern China, certain archaeological findings related to the Great Wall are not made public. Excavations are conducted, reports are filed, but the information does not leave academic circles. This is not unusual. Governments control narratives about national monuments. Discoveries that complicate or contradict official history are often withheld not out of conspiracy, but out of to maintain coherence, to avoid confusion, to preserve the story as it has been taught. But the withholding itself is revealing. If the Great Wall is exactly what the official history claims, a defensive structure built by the Qin and extended by later dynasties, then there should be no reason to restrict information. The findings should confirm the narrative. The fact that some do not, that some raise questions uncomfortable enough to warrant silence, suggests that the reality is more complex. What are they finding? We can only infer from fragments. Reports that circulate within academic networks, leaked images, testimonies from researchers who speak off the record. Bodies, yes. Chambers, yes. Symbols, artifacts, construction techniques that do not fit. But also evidence of continuity, of occupation spanning millennia, of the wall being not a single project, but a culmination, a final expression of something that began long before the Qin rose to power. If the Great Wall traces a line laid out by an earlier culture, if its foundations rest on preparations made thousands of years before the dynasties, then China's history extends deeper than the textbooks teach. And that depth, that complexity, that acknowledgement of inheritance rather than invention does not diminish China's achievements. It elevates them, because the greatness lies not in having built everything from scratch, but in having recognized value in what came before, in having preserved and extended a legacy that predated the empire, in having maintained continuity across millennia, even when the original knowledge faded. This is wisdom, the wisdom to honor what you inherit, to protect what you cannot fully replicate, to carry forward something greater than yourself. The ground does not forget. Erosion reveals, excavation uncovers, and beneath the restored sections, beneath the photographs and the myths, the evidence accumulates. Bodies in the mortar, chambers beneath the foundation, alignments that follow invisible lines. construction techniques that surpass the tools available, a scale of effort that demands more than military necessity. The Great Wall is not what we were taught. It is older, stranger, more layered than the story allows. It is a palimpsest, built over and over by different hands, for different reasons, but always following the same path. And that path was not arbitrary. It was chosen, perhaps by the Qin, perhaps by someone before them, someone who understood the land, the sky, the boundaries between worlds, and knew that some things must be marked, must be reinforced, must be held in place even at the cost of human life. The wall is a monument, yes, but it is also a warning, a reminder that civilizations are built on sacrifice, that permanence requires cost, and that the ground beneath our feet holds more than we acknowledge. The bones are there, the chambers are there, the knowledge, fragmented and fading, is there. And if we are willing to look beneath the surface, to excavate not just the stone but the meaning, we might begin to understand what the builders knew, what they feared, and what they were trying to keep out or keep in. The wall stands, the bodies remain, and the silence, heavy and ancient, holds its secret still.